So MSTR has not been performing that well as of late, and a lot of people are questioning their conviction on this and thinking, wow, I probably should have just bought Bitcoin instead. So in this video, I just want to share my thoughts about MSTR. I've covered it a lot in the past, and I want to talk about what's happened, what my future outlook is for MSTR. Do I think they'll be able to recover? What I am personally doing, and if I think MSTR is a buy here, a sell here, or whatnot. Of course, none of this is financial advice, but if you do want some help securing your Bitcoin, you can book me for a one-on-one session. Link for that is in the description, and it's to my website, Path to Bitcoin, where I can help you and guide you on your path to Bitcoin mastery. If we take a look here at strategy.com, this is their dashboard of all their metrics, and you can see that the 3-month return here is negative 30%, whereas Bitcoin has done fairly well. So in the year to date, it's done 26% up, whereas MSTR year to date is down 8%. So it's severely underperformed Bitcoin at this point. Now, the reason for that, of course, is this massive blow off top, or at least part of the reason for it is this massive blow off top, where it now needs to correct as it sort of front run a bunch of Bitcoin's move. If you overlay Bitcoin on this, and we'll just do IBIT because it has the same trading hours. So you can see if we go all the way to when IBIT was released, MSTR has massively outperformed IBIT since IBIT was released. And in this time here, it still outperformed because it front run, and it has now had this nasty sort of correction and all the way back down to some lows, and arguably for the technical analysis people out there, some support levels. Some people say it's already broken below them. I don't really see that, but you can kind of see here how it performs. And lately is when it's really underperformed. So it's really as of late that it has underperformed IBIT. So what is going on? Do I see a turnaround for MSTR? Is the correction that was sort of necessary with this sort of blow off top movement, is it done? There's a lot of questions to be asked here, right? There's a lot of questions. One question that some people might have is, has the wind in MSTR sales been taken out by all of the other treasury companies out there? I think that has been part of it. As much as economics and studying any stock always has multiple variables, I think there's tons and tons of variables when it comes to MSTR as well. So there's not one story that is telling you why something is happening. You have to parse around all of the different stories, all of the different information, and why somebody might be a seller as opposed to a buyer, because ultimately that is what drives the price here, is buys and sells. So are people selling? Are people buying? Right now, people have been net selling, right? That's why we're down 8% year to date, and down a lot in a very short period, 30% in the last 3 months. So what has caused people to sell in the last 3 months? What has strategy done differently? I would say one thing that has changed fundamentally here is people had the idea that a large MNAVs were realistic. People began to have this idea that, the 10 plus MNAV, that 5 MNAV, so a multiple to net asset value, is realistic for some of these up and coming companies. I know a lot of people that have gotten wrecked by them, and I had small positions in some of these that are pretty wrecked, and I'm just kind of waiting on them. I sold some of them at different points, sort of stop losses. But I hold some just thinking that these are really, really long-term plays. That is ultimately the thesis I have on strategy, and why it's taken me a while to make this video, even though it's been heavily requested, is because I have such a long-term thesis that it's less interesting to me when this kind of stuff happens, because I just plan to hold MSTR forever. I just don't expect it to outperform at all times. I don't expect it to be a 1-to-1 or a 2-to-1 correlation of Bitcoin. I expect it to be its own animal that is fueled by Bitcoin, and therefore will outperform Bitcoin in certain periods of time. And that is enough to turn off a lot of Bitcoin maxis out there, right? The idea that something can outperform Bitcoin, which this is amplified Bitcoin, right? So this idea right here, this metric, amplification, is debt and pref divided by Bitcoin NAV. So that's essentially because they're able to have debt, because they're able to get preferreds, they have additional access to more Bitcoin than if they had just bought with cash. So that additional Bitcoin, if it performs better than the debt, the cost of debt, or the cost of capital with the preferreds, then it amplifies, right? And this amplification goes to the downside as well. And it's not a one-to-one. It's not a perfect correlation because people are judging MSTR on a multitude of factors, as I talked about. So one factor is its creditworthiness, or the idea of this business strategy of just acquiring capital and using financial products to do so, and opening up the ability to, a lot of these treasury companies have opened up the ability to buy back their shares. And so at a negative MNAV, or a MNAV below 1, it makes sense for shareholders for them to buy back their stock, especially if they believe their stock is more valuable than it is. That's the whole argument, or should be the whole argument, for share buybacks, is that the team, the company, believes their shares are underpriced. So when a company is selling their shares, what does that signal to the market but that their shares are overpriced? Now, it's a little bit different because with strategy, when they're selling their MSTR common stock, the market might see this as, oh, this is overpriced, so they're selling it. And it is to Bitcoin, right? So it's overpriced to Bitcoin. But they're not an ETF. So like an ETF, the way it functions is essentially it is always trying to have an MNAV of 1. If capital comes to it in the form of somebody sending them their dollars to buy Bitcoin on behalf of them, they're supposed to take those dollars as soon as possible, buy Bitcoin with it, and so that they don't have more cash on hand. They don't have a sort of an unbalanced NAV, right? They're supposed to be able to buy that Bitcoin right away. Now with strategy, it's a much less perfect representation of this. So as they acquire capital, whether that's by participants in the market that want to buy MSTR, whether that's people in the preferred environment that are trying to buy these preferred instruments for the dividends they spit off, however they source their capital, they then buy Bitcoin with it. In a similar sense, they are reliant on income coming in from people buying their instruments, just as IBIT is reliant on increased net asset value or increased amount of Bitcoin based on individuals buying their product, IBIT, right? So there's the same thing. However, MSTR is selling a variety of these instruments, and these instruments have leverage within them. So it's not a one-to-one. They're not just buying Bitcoin with the exact amount of, one MSTR equals one Bitcoin or something like that, right? People are buying these debt instruments, and MSTR is paying that debt off over time, or the equivalent of that debt. And in the meantime, they are buying Bitcoin. So they sort of have this asset they're able to buy that they believe will outperform the asset that they are selling, right? It's not a one-to-one. So in my eyes, just based on that, they deserve a premium because they're able to arbitrage their ability to get cheap and good debt, right? And their debt right now, it's going to get cheaper and cheaper, in my opinion. Right now, I actually calculated for another video I was doing, their blended cost of capital for their last week of issuance of perfs was around 9.2%. So they're able to raise $43 million in 1 week from issuing debt at a rate of 9.2. And there's a caveat in there, that debt never needs to be repaid in full. It gets paid off forever. And essentially now that Bitcoin they buy, one way to look at it is the Bitcoin they buy with that is now encumbered with the cost of the capital used to acquire that Bitcoin. So if Bitcoin goes up in 20%, it's the Bitcoin they bought at the cost of capital of 9.2%. That Bitcoin is actually going up 11%, right? Or, 10.8%. So that's one way to think about it. And that is sort of net, right? They see all the upside and all the downside of buying the Bitcoin, and they have this responsibility to pay these dividends for these perfs, and the perfs are buying them because they don't want the upside and downside. They just want exposure to the debt instrument that is going to pay them out over time, and MSTR is willing to take the risk of continually paying that regardless of what Bitcoin does. So if that's the case, if Bitcoin on average goes up 20%, which is bear case, I would say, and spread out over time where you're not seeing the volatility, because it can go down, a lot, or it can go up a lot and, retrace back and all that. This is blended over 4 years, 5 years, something like that. If it has a 20% average return over that time, that positive 10.8% from that 20 minus the 9.2 is all value accrued to the balance sheet of MSTR. That's value of that Bitcoin going up, right? And that's a stronger and stronger balance sheet over time. So that's a pretty powerful business model. Selling something, debt, buying something better. Now, if you're investing in MSTR, you have to believe in Bitcoin. In my eyes, Bitcoin's going to outperform 20%. And in my eyes, debt, US denominated debt, is going to become almost worthless because the dollar is going to become almost worthless at a certain point. So paying that debt is meaningless. And how they pay it, right? Like literally, they could sell their Bitcoin, right? They could, over time, right? If the cost of capital is 9.2 and the value of that Bitcoin is raising at, 20, then they literally sell the equivalent amount to pay the dividend off, and they see just gains of that 10.2 over time, right? So they could literally pay it off by selling their Bitcoin and continue to be profitable based on that, if Bitcoin continues to do what it is built to do and will do, based on all the evidence that we need. So in the short term, there are many reasons why MSTR has come down, right? There's many reasons. There's short interest. There is questionability of all of this. There's the wind taken out of sails from other treasury companies. There's all sorts of things I could point my finger at. There's the blow off top. There's just the consolidation pattern, and a leverage play is going to perform worse in a consolidation pattern than a spot play, because leverage, cuts to the downside as well, right? So it is not what you want to be if you're in a market that's just trading sideways. You don't really want to be in leverage, right? You want to be in leverage for those times where you have an explosive move to the upside, which Bitcoin has, 10 to 12 days a year, has an explosive move to the upside. And if you're not holding for that period, you're not exposed to it. And if you're not leveraged for that period, then you're, not leveraged exposed to it. So essentially, this is a game of patience with Bitcoin, and then beyond that with MSTR, right? So yes, Bitcoin is painful. I've made a video in the past called Bitcoin is Max Pain. The reason for that is Bitcoin is painful to hold in the short term, and MSTR is even more painful because of the added leverage and the fact that it's a smaller market cap, so it can get thrown around a lot easier. It can get, speculatively attacked from short sellers and all sorts of things, which those people end up being buyers at a certain point anyway. So it's just the way the market is built. But these things, it's much easier to move around MSTR's share price than it is to move around Bitcoin. And there's additional dynamics like the fact that they're selling their own shares, which provides ability for shorts to exit their position without, just really, really easily, right? So there's no ability for a short squeeze, because as soon as MSTR's share price pops, it's for the best interest of MSTR to sell into that, right? So there's sort of these dynamics as they get figured out. The market says, you know what, we're not really going to let these favorable dynamics happen at our expense as short-term traders and holders. Instead, we're going to punish you by not allowing these to happen, essentially, is what we've seen. So they've had to pivot. And what's really interesting about strategy in some eyes is if you actually look at what they've done, they're constantly pivoting. They're constantly changing what they do. And I think a lot of people give them a lot of credit for being sort of visionaries and for having built a company that was trading at what, 4 billion to, the close to the 80 billion that it's at now, 93 billion enterprise value that it's at now. People give it a lot of credit for that, and deservingly so, but a lot of the stuff they've done has been, hey, will this work? And it doesn't, and they move on and they do something different. So the convertible bonds they have now were incredibly successful at the time because they were issuing those into Bitcoin going up, and they were the first to do it. And there was an arbitrage, sort of a delta hedge going against them, long bonds, short stocks, which was negative to them. But they were able to use that capital raise to buy so much Bitcoin, which fueled the growth of the company because of the value of that Bitcoin going up. So it really worked advantageous at the time. And now those converts are starting to be seen for the liability that they are, the added debt that comes due. And even with this recent credit rating that they got, which is a B-, which is junk grade debt, the convertible bonds was one of the line issues, saying like, this is part of why we're, giving it the rating we're giving it. And Strategy has talked in the past about, eliminating those and moving STRF, which is the highest on the capital stack preferred, moving that upwards, which I think is a value proposition of being an STRF shareholder, is that you'll move up on the capital stack and you won't be randomly moved down if a new perf is added in, like STRC was added in, and STRK was negatively affected as it was lowered on the capital stack from that new issuance. STRF is moving upwards. Convertible bonds will get rolled off, converted, all these kinds of things, and that will improve the credit rating of Strategy, right? They got a credit rating as a company. Their debt did not get credit ratings yet. So all this stuff, like everything about Strategy is yet, right? Everything is in the future. The present is incredibly strong for Strategy because they have 640,000 Bitcoin and they're relatively compressed on their MNAV, and they have a strategy to be able to acquire more Bitcoin and more leverage even with that compressed MNAV, right? Because they were actually de-levering when they were issuing so many shares. So now they're adding more leverage on, and it's sort of a slow process. They can only do it so much into the available markets, but those markets may become more and more available. And the current cost of capital that they are experiencing will, in my opinion, go down as other debt instruments become less and less attractive as yields around the short end up going down from the Fed continuing to lower rates. So it's looking positive. There's a positive outlook, in my opinion, for Strategy. And ultimately, there's a positive outlook for Bitcoin because Bitcoin is the other monetary network that is being built, being discovered, and being used by individuals that want to preserve their purchasing power. So if Bitcoin has an incredibly strong future, which it does, then the company with the most Bitcoin, with a very modest amount of leverage and debt and things like that, right? Like their debt is so low compared to their Bitcoin holdings, right? They have 12% debt to their Bitcoin holdings, incredibly low amount of debt. The individual, like I have less debt than that as an individual, but 10% is like the most I would want as an individual. As a corporation, you can do a lot more. And using preferreds that never come due, you can potentially even use more because all you're doing is that arbitrage, again, of the growth of the asset that you're buying for the cost of the debt. And it's never coming due. Neither of those necessarily are coming due. You can, again, just constantly, if the worst case scenario is you just sell little bits of Bitcoin to pay off the debt, but that Bitcoin continues to outpace the growth, even with the selling off to pay for that perpetual debt, right? It's really, really that simple. Hard thing to wrap your head around because it's sort of new, that this concept. Perpetual preferreds are not really a thing, I don't think. I think maybe these are the first. They're being traded on the open market. Anybody can buy them. Anyone can add these. And anybody is contributing to MSTR's ability to be able to buy more Bitcoin by doing so. And I think that the future is incredibly bright for Strategy. And I think that with the recent, bearishness, with the MNAV compression, I think that there's probably still likely some sideways action. However, it feels like how long can that go on for before Bitcoin makes a move and MSTR either front runs it or follows, but just makes a even larger move because of the added leverage and amplification that they have. I am very bullish on MSTR in the short term. I completely understand why people are not. They've been beaten down, and if you're it's pretty easy to be emotional about your money, right? And be emotional about your assets. And a lot of people are not trained, built, and have the natural disposition to be able to handle the short-term volatility. Seeing your portfolio be down, this kind of stuff can feel really bad. But essentially, that's why most people and most traders are not profitable in the long run, is because they see it go down, that freaks them out, they sell. Then they see it go up and they think, oh, why did I sell? I got to buy back in. And all of a sudden their cost basis is higher. So that's typically what happens. So selling MSTR now when the prospects of it look pretty favorable into the future, what else are you buying? I don't know. It's in some ways I am very understanding about the idea of selling your MSTR and buying Bitcoin, because if you buy Bitcoin, yes, it might underperform. Yes, it might be bad timing, but you now have Bitcoin. When you had MSTR, you just had shares of a company that has Bitcoin. You have no claim to that Bitcoin. You can't redeem those shares in kind to your Bitcoin. You can't send those shares peer-to-peer to somebody. It is not protected by your seed phrase, by your passphrase, by your multi-sig. It is not held as a bearer instrument. It is not the same asset. So you might perform less if you time it wrong and all of that, and depending, who knows what happens in the future. But I completely understand the idea of just buying Bitcoin and selling your MSTR. I completely understand that, because it is an entirely different asset. And if you value those other things that I talked about, then you should have been in Bitcoin to begin with. So you sort of made a mistake by buying MSTR in the first place, if those other properties were very important to you. And if they're not, if you're like selling MSTR to buy IBIT, that, is debatable if that's the right choice or not. Personally, that's not something I'm doing. I'm holding my MSTR. I sell covered calls on my MSTR position. So even though I'm actually down on my current position. I held MSTR before, and then I bought a sort of a covered call ETF, and then I sold that and bought MSTR to sell my own covered calls. So my current cost basis is a lot higher than it actually is, but it's only just sort of measured at the recent buy, right? So what I'm down 30% on that, but I'm down a lot less than that if we actually, you know what? I can pull this up. So yeah, so I would be down 38% on my position here with my original cost of $443 per share. I basically bought at a nice local top, how we do. And I've earned $4,592 of premium by selling covered calls in that time. And so I'm actually down 30%, basically. It sucks, but I've lowered my average cost basis to $395. And of course, I'm down so much because MSTR is down so much. So I'm in the same boat as a lot of people that are complaining about MSTR, that are worried about MSTR, but I'm at least, earning some income along the way and reinvesting that income back into MSTR and Bitcoin and all sorts of stuff. So that's a strategy that I do. It's not for everybody. I sell pretty far out of the money covered calls, and they've done fine because MSTR has gone down. But if MSTR all of a sudden rips, I might be stuck in, covered call purgatory and trading sideways and rolling them until it becomes profitable again and all sorts of stuff. But that's something I navigate, and I actually have, for members only, a video explaining my full strategy for MSTR covered calls, which you could join up and become a member of YouTube and find that. But yeah, that's about it. That's my current thesis, my current thoughts around MSTR. This is definitely more of a bit of a rambly video than I typically do. I try to be concise, but a lot of people have just wondered, hey, what do you think about MSTR? This is what I currently think of MSTR, and I think that It's got a bright future ahead of it. I think that future is bright because of the nuclear reactor of Bitcoin that they hold. And Bitcoin's future is incredibly bright because the coin is orange. And so much more than that, obviously. Thanks everyone for watching. Now, if you do want to get yourself some Bitcoin, I recommend checking out Bitcoin Well. They're a non-custodial exchange, and just from signing up, you'll get some free Bitcoin using my link in the description and my code. You can also get 15% off of Stampseed kit. You can get 5% off of the Start 9 to run your own Bitcoin node. And there's a few other links in there, cold card link, and yeah, just again, links to book me for a one-on-one if you want to talk Bitcoin. And thanks everyone for watching. We'll see you in the next episode of Bitcoin, Not Crypto.